I'm Deanna, and welcome to another doll repaint video. So one of the things that I really like about doll repainting is it's kind of an outlet for me when I get really hyper-focused on a new interest or hobby. I don't know about you, but I tend to be like, oh, that's really cool. I'm gonna go research that and buy a bunch of supplies for it, and then turn around and be like, oh, that's really interesting. I'm gonna go research that and buy a bunch of supplies for that, and so forth and so on. So with doll repainting, I can kind of take my new interest and put it in towards dolls. So that's certainly the case for this doll. You probably saw the title, so you might have guessed already that my latest obsession has been snails. So listen, I've always liked snails, and their shells are pretty and they have cute little derpy faces, and overall,
I just think they're neat.
But I didn't really start obsessing over them until I came across this video that talked about giant African snails, and I just completely fell in love with them. But before I could look for a snail rescue, Exotic dropped this bombshell on me.
Say that African land snails are illegal in several different countries, with the United States being one of them.
Friends, I was absolutely gutted. Just like that, my lifelong dream of a whole 2 minutes came crashing down around me. But from heartbreak and disappointment, I came up with a plan. If I can't have a giant snail in real life, then I can make a doll who can have one. A giant snail so giant, in fact, that it's practically monstrous. So today's doll is named Gail, and Gail loves all sorts of animals and creatures. So one day, Gail adopted a pet snail of her very own. And as luck would have it, this pet snail kept growing larger and larger and larger and larger until one day Gail ended up having to take it for walks around her neighborhood. I hope you're just as excited as I am to be going on a snail adventure today, because not only are we repainting a doll for Gail, we're also going to be creating her very own extraordinarily large snail. So with that being said, enough talking, let's get started. I wanted to try something a little bit different for today's doll. I usually work with Monster High dolls, but I have a couple different Ever After High dolls in my supply, and I decided to turn one into Gail. This particular doll spoke to me, so as her first part of her prep, I'm soaking her head in boiling hot water, which will soften the plastic so that I can detach the head and remove the old hair plugs. I'm not as familiar with Ever After High dolls as I am with Monster High, so if you know who this is, be sure to comment below and let me know. After I remove her hair plugs, I'll do my usual prep of removing her factory face paint with pure acetone, which will give me a nice blank slate for me to repaint. Before we can do Gail's face up, I'm going to have to reroot her hair. And before I can do that, I need to make some hair out of acrylic yarn. I chose this yarn because of its multi-tonal coloration. Once I brush out the yarn into wefts, the light and dark browns of the yarn will look like she has highlights and lowlights in her hair. The yarn wefts are all brushed out, but I want the hair a little bit straighter, so I'm taking my mini hair iron to smooth the wefts out. Check out all the little highlights throughout the hair that we got from the multi-tonal yarn. I really love how this turned out. In my punk rock green rabbit repaint, I first started exploring the technique of rerooting hair using yarn wefts while I made her mohawk. I'm continuing my experimentation with Gail's hair, and I'm going to use my rerooting needle to apply those lovely locks of hair we just made. For her hairstyle, I'm going to make things easier for myself and apply new hair plugs to the holes that were left behind from her old hair. Rerooting can be a very long process, and as you can see here, I actually brought my doll with me on a road trip home for Thanksgiving, so I didn't waste any precious rerooting time. Now that we're back home, Gail has been fully rerooted and she has a lovely full head of hair. The next step is pouring some glue to the inside of the head and letting it dry for at least 24 hours. This will ensure that the hair plugs stay in place in the future. The glue has dried, and now I'm adding this old sock to protect the hair from sealant and pigment. You can see that I've used this sock quite a bit on other dolls because it's looking a little bit crusty. Once the sock is fully secured to the head, I can go ahead and give her face 3 layers of Mr. Super Clear sealant, which will make it possible to start applying pigment to the squishy rubbery plastic used for her head. Okay, so each layer of Mr. Super Clear has dried for at least 30 minutes each, and her skin now has a papery texture, and that means I can start with her face up. The first step of her face up is to make certain areas of her face have the appearance of there being blood just underneath the skin. This coloration is called an undertone, and depending on the person, they can appear cool, warm, or neutral colored. Gail has warm undertones that appear green underneath her skin. I'm using a mid-tone and darker burnt sienna brown to shade and contour her face, and I'm making sure that I'm blending them with the green undertones so that they all look like a unified part of her skin. Next, I want to take her skin from looking like perfect doll skin to imperfectly beautiful human-looking skin by spritzing on some watered-down acrylic paints to give the skin some texture. For Gail's skin, I'm giving her 2 different brown colors and some red to achieve this look. After letting the texture layer dry and sealing it with Mr. Super Clear, we're now going to add some reds for blushing. I'll be adding this to the cheeks, of course, but I also like to apply this to the nose to give my dolls a healthy glow to them. The red will calm down in color after applying my next layer of sealant, but the red will remain as a subtle color variant in her skin, which will give depth to her whole face. Next, I'm using that same red and lining the outside of the blocked-in eyes. Eyes have a slight transparency to them, so instead of making them a flat white color, I want to give the impression that you can see a touch of the blood vessels that are inside the eyes. Now we're going to start blocking in the eye shape using watercolor pencils. For Gail's expression, I'm going to try to capture the contentedness that Gail is feeling as she takes her snail out for a walk. It's a nice fall day and she's feeling the crisp air and enjoying the sunshine at the same time. Her feet are crunching on fallen leaves as she walks down the sidewalk, and she's feeling pride as she waves at her neighbors while they marvel and stare at her extraordinarily large snail. You know, that kind of expression. Using acrylic paints, I've decided that I want to add a few little freckles to her skin, which will stand out from the other texture I added earlier. I want the freckles to vary in size, shape, and how dark they are, like how real freckles vary in real life, so I'm adding them as randomly as I can. Okay, so we've added reds to the eyes to add depth, and the next thing we're going to do is add some shadows to the eyes. The eyelashes cast shadows to the eyes, so I'm going to start blocking in some shading to the tops of the eyes with this gray. As we continue with the face up, I'll keep building the shading up with darker grays and a touch of black. Before I continue to work on her irises, I want to work on her lower waterlines and her lashes. For her face up, I decided that I want to add some highlighted areas under her eyes that show the creases and ridge that appear under the eye sockets. I think the lines give a really cute and kind of youthful look to the face. Around the eyes, I'm applying some smoky eyeshadows to her crease and lower lash line. She's going to have really natural looking makeup, but I wanted to give her a little bit of a dramatic eye. I've already blocked in where I want her eyebrows to be in soft pastels, so now the next step is actually drawing them in. Using a really sharp watercolor pencil, I'm drawing on the individual hairs, trying to keep them as light and wispy as possible to give them a naturally grown-in look. To the scleras, I'm adding a touch of white paint so that it looks like a part of the eye is coming forward. The shading done to the eyes was a little too flat in color, so adding the white will really make them pop. Next, I want to add some texture to the irises. I like to do this part in pencil usually, but I couldn't get the sealant to set properly on her eyes this time, so I'm coming in with some white paint to apply some lines to her irises. This will act as a base for me to come in with some lighter pencils that will add some interest to her eye color. Then we want to add some catch lights to her eyes to give them that little spark of life. The last part of her face up is to give her that glossy shine to her lips and eyes. I use Sculpey brand gloss for this and usually give my dolls 2 coats for a nice shine. Now we're going to repaint her body. Most of Gail's body will be covered up by her outfit, but I still think it's important to give the whole body the repaint treatment. This keeps the doll looking cohesive and well put together. Like we did with the skin on her face, we're going to start by giving her body the same green undertones. These will go to the areas of the body where the blood vessels show on the skin more. Think areas like the joints, wrists, ankles, and arm and knee pits. It is also usually in areas that are in recessed places. Next, we want to start her shading. I like to start with a mid-tone color and build my way up to the darkest color. The soft blending of colors will really help to show the curvature of the different parts of her body, which will show depth in her features. After the shading's done, I want to add the same texture sprays to the skin. Like on the face, we're going to use the same two brown colors and red to add interest to her skin. We're going for an imperfect balance of blemishes that aren't too strong, but also don't get lost in the shading done on previous layers. And lastly, I'm coming in with my darkest brown to really emphasize the recessed areas, which will also make the highlighted zones pop. Gail can't take her Snail out for a walk without a stylish outfit, so off camera, I sewed her this pinafore style dress using some suede fabric. I want to give the front some buttons to make it a button-up style dress, so with a washable marker, I'm spacing out where I want to add some little buttons. I thought it would be really cute to make Gail a little matching shell that she could wear like a backpack, and I'm going to repurpose this paper mache mold that I used for our old hat form. The base is pretty much the perfect shape and size for the shell, but I do need to shape it a bit for it to be perfect. Before I can decorate it to make it really look like a snail shell, I'm going to build up a spiral shape on the side of the shell using some hot glue. I'm going to add it layer by layer, letting the glue harden in between each part of the spiral so that I can build it up and give the spiral some height. I decided to go with this paper mache base because I thought it would really give the shell a kind of homemade look. And I think it's a sweet idea that Gail loves her pet snails so much that she made this shell herself out of paper mache. With the spiral built, the first thing I want to do to decorate her shell is give it a cream base coat. I want to start with a uniform color, and I also don't want any of the text of the paper mache to show through the shell's paint later. I let the base coat dry, and now I'm going to start coming in and painting different colored stripes onto the shell. After letting the paint dry, I filled the shell in and gave it a foam backing. Now I want to make some straps for the shell so she can wear it like a backpack. I had some leftover zip ties laying around, so I sized the loops to the doll and I'm going to glue them onto the backing of the shell. Everything is really coming together for her outfit, and I think it's time to put the whole thing on. First, I made her this little striped shirt to wear under her pinafore dress. Now I'm going to unwrap her hair and style it so we can reattach it to her body. There's not much styling that's going to be going into her hairstyle today. She's going to be wearing her hair long and straight, so I'm just rubbing a little bit of glue into her hair to slick it down a bit. The reason I'm keeping it so simple is because she's going to be wearing a cute little beanie hat to go with her fall time outfit. With her beanie on, I think she looks really cool with her long straight hair, and you can still see the soft highlights in it. I've put her backpack on and her whole outfit looks really cute. I love the homemade feel of the shell, and I think it works really well with the whole outfit. So I've been going on and on and on and on and on about Gail's giant snail, and you're probably sitting there going,
Diana, when are we going to make this huge heckin' snail?
and the answer is right now. I had a couple of ideas on how to construct Gail's giant snail, but I think the best medium to work with for this project is polymer clay. Starting with a yellow ochre base, I'm going to start mixing in a couple different shades of brown to get a marbled effect in the clay. I also found it easier to blend the colors of the clay while using a clay conditioning machine, and I kept chopping it up and running it through until I ended up with something that I liked. To construct the shell, I'm using a rolled up ball of tinfoil as the base. It's really bumpy, so before I add any of the marbled clay, I'm first going to add a base layer of white clay over it. This will reduce the bumpiness for the actual shell and give it some thorough coverage so there aren't any spots that have tinfoil showing through. On top of this first layer, I'm also going to build up the spiral of the shell, which I'll blend into another layer of white clay. Snail shell texture is made up of all these little ridges, so as I lay the clay, I want to mimic that texture by applying the marbled clay in strips. This way it will look like it has really grown into their shell. I'm going to be applying the clay to follow the curvature of the shell and make it look like it's going into the curve of the shell spiral. After all the clay has been applied and there's no white clay showing, I'm now going to take some of the remaining marbled clay and I'm going to make a little lip for the shell that will go around the bottom. I want to add a little more texture to the snail shell, so using this awesome little clay tool, I'm adding some deeper ridges into the shell. Once my shell is nice and groovy, I'll pop it in the oven to bake. While the shell bakes in the oven, it's time to make the body of the snail. Snails come in a variety of colors, but I knew I wanted to stick with the same basic color palette that I used on the shell. The difference is the body is going to be a lot lighter in color and with a little hint of pink to make it look fleshy. I've got a pretty good basic shape for the body, so now it's time to start adding in some smaller details. Snails have this little ridge on their faces that kind of look like lips, and I think will add a lot of personality to its little slimy face. So I always think of snails and slugs as being smooth because of the underside of their body, but they actually have a bumpy texture to the tops of their bodies. So taking little pinches of clay, I'm going to cover our snail friend with little bumps. So now I'm going to add 4 little antennae to our snail's face, and to do that I'm first adding some wire as little armatures. I want the armatures to be really secure in the clay before I build the antenna around them, so I'm going to pre-bake the body just a little bit to set the clay. Now that I don't have to worry about squishing our snail's little face, I can start covering the wire with clay to form the antenna. And then, once the antennae are covered, I'll add some lumpies and bumpies to the head too and stick it back into the oven to bake. While our snail bod bakes, I'm jumping back over to the shell and I'm defining the spiral and shell lip with some darker paints. Snail shells will often have some sort of pattern on them, so I mix this darker brown tone so I can create my very own pattern for our shell. While our snail friend was in the oven, I decided that I'm going to name it Gilda. Gilda Radner Snail. So we of course can't leave Gilda's body as is. No, we gotta shade her body too. For Gilda, I'm starting the shading by dry brushing on some burnt sienna paint. We're going to be keeping some areas of the original color of the body, but we're going to be using the light brown to bring out the crevices of Gilda's bumps and folds. We want to go darker with the next color, and for this shade I mixed brown and blue. This glaze will really make the bumps pop, but we don't want to apply it to the whole body, just in places that are in shadow. Now it's time to add details to the antenna. I want them to look somewhat transparent, so I'm using my paint glazes strategically to make it look like the colors are coming from the inside of the antenna. On the tops of the antenna are Gilda's little eyes. I painted on a base for them already, but now I'm coming in with my blue-brown color to deepen them and almost give them the appearance of pupils. And since Gilda has 4 adorable eyes, I want to give them some little catch lights to make them super cute. I've let Gilda completely dry, but now it's time to make her slimy. To give her a proper slimy shine, I'm going to coat her in some gel top coat and set it in my UV curing light. And here's Gilda curing in the UV light. It's almost like she's in a little tanning bed, which is so freaking cute. Gilda's done using the UV light bed, but the top coat is still a little sticky. I want Gilda to be slimy, but not actually sticky, so I'm taking some rubbing alcohol pads to wipe away the sticky residue. Without a shell, Gilda's just a slug. So let's get her dressed by hot gluing the shell onto her body. And for a final touch, I'm using some of this braided yarn to make a leash for Gilda. Gail would never forgive herself if Gilda got loose on their walk. Of course, it would be a really slow chase if Gilda did get loose, but still, it's better to be safe than sorry. Here's our final look at Gail and Gilda. Overall, I really enjoyed using an Ever After High doll for this project. They have rounder faces, the Monster High dolls, so that allowed me to go into more details on her face and eyes than I would get on a Monster High doll. I think if I saw Gail on the street, I would want her to be my friend, even if she didn't have a giant snail. I think she looks really cute and cool in her outfit, and I think anyone who would wear a snail shell backpack around is pretty cool. I'm also totally in love with Gilda. I really like when I can feature polymer clay props with my dolls, and Gilda is probably my most successful feature out of everything I've done so far. I like that I was able to make her look like she has a little bit of personality in her eyes and face, and it's not every day where I can make something look super slimy, and that's a good thing. I may not be able to have my own giant African snail, but I might just make a whole fleet of them to fill that snail-shaped void in my heart. I love animals, so I could totally see myself making more dolls with exotic pets down the road. So let me know if there's an animal or a critter you'd like to see me make. So what do you think of Gail and Gilda the giant snail? I really hope that you love them as much as I do, and that Gilda's little face melts your heart like it does mine. Let me know in the comments, and if you really like this video, please help my channel grow by giving it a like and subscribing to my channel. I love bringing you a new doll every month, and your support really helps me be able to share my art, which is a dream come true for me. Alright, Gail and I have to go take Gilda outside to go do her snail business, but I'll see you next time with another doll repaint video. Bye!